Welcome to Off Hours, a conversation between Jon Edwards and Chris Manning.
The last episode we recorded in person there at your studio, the first time I'd been to your studio in quite some time since the lockdown started. And a few people expressed a bit of concern about that, but I did have a mask with me. And I also had fresh from my 3D printer a custom accessory for that mask that you had sent me, which was quite a neat little addition. Gives a very snug fit to the mask because it actually is built off of a 3D scan of your face using the essentially the same tech that Face ID uses on the iPhone to generate a custom fitting overlay for any fabric or cloth type mask. And pretty impressed with this little piece of tech, and as simple and yet complex as it is. So we did take reasonable precautions and kept our distance there in the shop as well while I was there. And I hear you've had a chance to print your own of these since then as well.
Yeah, I've actually printed a few of these now. One of the nice things about this tech, as you say, it uses a scan of your face taken from the phone. One of the advantages of a lot of the new tech that's being put into the iPhones is that it allows you to do these 3D scans of things. And in this case, there's a company that's created a piece of software that you do a quick scan of your face, and it's then able to generate a sort of a generic frame for your face that is fitted for your face. So it's sort of a generic shape, but it's fitted exactly for your face. And I've printed off a bunch of these now. Done one for Rich and myself and Tamara and and a few other people. So it's really, really easy to do them. It's actually scary just how simple it is to generate this 3D model and then generate the mask from it. In fact, there's an option in that software to be able to do a full 3D scan of your head and then output an STL file, which is just a 3D point file that can be put into various 3D modeling applications. And so I did do that as well. And so now I have a 3D model of my head that I can bring into applications and, maybe do something nefarious with, and maybe create a giant sculpture of myself at some point.
Just how giant?
Well, we do have a large area out in front of our studio that's currently empty and needs something in it. So maybe, I don't know, 20 feet tall? How does that sound?
It actually sounds achievable with the CNC equipment you guys have there in the shop.
Yeah, that's the funny thing. Some of the tools we have, we could actually do it. But yeah, it's scary just how fast and how accurate this thing is. Like I was skeptical when Rich first told me about it, and I'm like, how good is this actually going to be? And it is really, really good, and it fits perfectly. And I know people that have small noses. I know people that have big noses. And it fits perfectly around their big or small nose, so it's exactly what they need. And it's turned out pretty well. So we'll make sure to put a link in the show notes to this application. You can do the basic one for free. There's no cost associated with it at all. And then, of course, you just need access to a 3D printer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm always a little leery of free apps, particularly when they're harvesting facial data and this sort of thing. But the company here is Bellis 3D, and it seems what they do for their prime business actually has to do with dental work and whatnot, which will often involve taking a scan of a face. They've simply repurposed that tech to rise to the occasion and deliver a really useful and handy app to help in the fight against COVID-19. And the app itself does also have a viable business model to it, in that you can customize it and throw some money at them to be able to do that as well. But just for the basic tech and getting a printout that has their name emblazoned upon it, it is absolutely free to use. And the name of the app is just simply Face App. And again, that's by Bellis 3D. And then an even simpler and low-tech take on this by a designer that they've made freely available through a tutorial on YouTube and some downloads for the cutout files is a system that uses just a flat rubber sheet that you use to make custom rubber gaskets with, generally for like automotive and other purposes like that. But it's actually a useful material for watchmakers too, because sometimes you'll have some older watches that have these flat gaskets in them, and you can use this same material to make a flat gasket that is custom tailored to the shape of the case just by tracing out a case back on it, or say the correct diameter for what you're looking for. But just using a simple sheet of rubber and a printout from a computer printer, you can trace the shape on, cut it out, and you get a very tight fit on a fabric mask that contours to your face in the same way that, or similar enough way, what an N95 mask would be like on your face. So that's an even simpler approach, and we'll post a link to that video as well for anyone who might want a closer fitting mask but may not have access to a 3D printer.
That'll certainly be a little bit easier for some people, depending on what access they have to different technology. It certainly will be interesting to see what other methods people come up with for creating better fitting masks, because as useful as the cloth masks are that people are making, there are still limitations of what they're doing just because they're not close fitting over your face. And, a lot of people complained, for instance, about their glasses fogging up when they're wearing a mask. It's like, well, that means that it's not actually doing everything that it's supposed to be doing, because you've got air coming up unfiltered between the mask and your face. We'll see what happens with some of these. The more of them that are out there, the better. And I suspect that before too long, most people will have, hopefully, will have some kind of tight-fitting, either custom or semi-custom way of actually putting a mask on their face and keeping themselves safe.
I'm sure we're going to be seeing more and more of this as time goes on, at least until a vaccine is found for COVID-19.
Well, I'm hoping this actually sticks around for a while. Obviously, COVID-19 will eventually be something that we either have a vaccine for, or it sort of dies down enough because there are enough people in the community that have some kind of tolerance to it that it can't spread as a pandemic. But at the same time, this isn't the only airborne virus that we have to deal with on a regular basis, and probably not the last airborne virus that we're going to have to deal with. So hopefully this is something that we can sort of keep around and sort of keep handy for whatever future issues we have, and maybe even just something as simple as the flu season. Hopefully we'll see more people in North America and in the West in general, to be honest. Hopefully we'll see more people actually wearing masks when they're sick, or when we're in the height of flu season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's something that just occurred to me and my wife just recently is the fact that no one in our family has been sick since the lockdown began, which is kind of unusual when you have children going to school, particularly kindergarten, grade 1 sort of age, just like subjected to a petri dish of all manner different germs and things throughout the course of their week. And I don't think there has been more than a 3-week stretch since my son started going to school that at least one person in the family has not been sick, and now we've gone for several months with everyone in good health. So I'm certainly grateful for that.
Yeah, I'm kind of worried about the flu season that's coming up later this year, just because I think that'll be long enough after the worst of this pandemic that people will let their guards down a little bit, and then we'll get a double whammy of the flu, the cold, and probably COVID-19 hitting again. So. But you're not the first person that's told me the similar story where this is the healthiest they've been in years, just because their children are no longer going to bioweapon factories called schools and picking up whatever latest weaponized virus has accumulated there.
So the latest Time for a Pint will have dropped by the time this episode goes live, and actually you probably tuned in for that episode already. There, Chris, I've yet to catch up. But the one prior to that, I was not allowed to miss. I was there. I took part. I got to see your lovely visage there on the screen before me. And I actually had someone comment to me that they were quite impressed with both of our video feeds. And I got to see a little behind the scenes peek of your setup, and it was quite impressive. So just how did you manage to get such lovely video coming in through Zoom there?
Well, I have to say I was mildly annoyed about some of my stuff that I figured out later. Like my audio was there was an audio sync issue with mine, and it was off by a couple of frames, which was kind of annoying. I'm sure most people didn't even notice it, and they probably chalked it up to a Zoom issue. But my audio was about 4 frames out of sync with my video, which was mildly annoying to me. Just because I have been playing more with video and audio editing a lot over the last few years, so I'm noticing those things. But yeah, I was using a new setup that I've got that I've been trying to figure out for doing live streams. In some ways for this kind of thing, for being able to do something like a Zoom call or whatever, where you're doing a virtual get together, but also for being able to do live streams to something like YouTube. And so I've been working on a setup like this for a while now, and I've wanted to build a setup like this for a while. And in my case, I'm using a product from Blackmagic Design called the ATEM Mini Pro, and it's actually designed as a video switcher specifically for streaming live video. So you could put multiple HDMI inputs into it, and those HDMI inputs can be literally any HDMI input. It could be a camera, it could be a computer, it could be a PlayStation, right? It could be anything you want. It will then take it and allow you to control those streams. It'll allow you to control which camera is live at that time. It takes the audio and deals with the audio properly, all of those kinds of things. And in the case of something like a YouTube live stream, it will actually allow you to stream straight from the device up to YouTube. You don't actually have to have a computer in between or anything like that. So the intention for me is that I want to be able to eventually stream what I'm doing at the workbench, whether I'm at the jeweler's bench, at my watchmaker's bench, whether I'm turning at my watchmaker's lathe. Probably more often than not, it will be for something like my straight line engine, because that's something that very few people have access to or get a chance to see sort of live. So I'll be able to stream what I'm doing. I can cut to different cameras depending on what it is that I'm doing. People will be able to then ask me questions as I'm doing things live. So that's what that was designed for. And then in my case, I had my Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K plugged into it, which is complete overkill for what it was doing. It's only ever outputting at 1080p, but it's the camera that I happen to have around and that was decent quality. So that was what I had aimed at me. I wasn't just using my the camera off my MacBook Pro or whatever. So that's why I was able to get an interesting angle, a decent angle of my face, and it looks good, and it's all that good stuff. So it has a proper lens on it, all the fun things.
A lovely bit of bokeh in the background too.
Yeah, it's nice having a proper camera to do that stuff with, and there are things that you can do with it that you can't do with a webcam. Although one of the things that kind of annoyed me was that I went to the effort of actually properly color correcting and my image beforehand, not realizing that everybody else's was going to be very warm, and so everybody else's image looks quite warm, and mine looks very cold by comparison, even though it's actually color accurate. Everybody else's looks warm and mine looks cold. So I was kind of annoyed by that. I'm like, I should have warmed mine up a bit so that it matched the look and feel of everybody else's.
It's nice that you're able to have the power and control to have been able to do that had you wanted to. 'Cause a typical webcam is not going to give you that sort of breadth of control over what's coming out of the camera.
This is actually a remarkable product, especially for the price. It's there are 2 versions of it. There's a pro version and sort of a normal version. Both are excellent, and both are under $1,000. And they really are. They have a lot of the features that pro level video switchers have. And in fact, Blackmagic actually design pro video switchers that are worth multiple tens of thousands of dollars and are designed for doing full-on 4K production, broadcast to air kind of studio setups. And so this is based on their background and knowledge in doing that kind of thing. And this provides you with a huge percentage of those features. There's certain things like this only does 1080p output to the internet if you're streaming from it, whereas their high-end pro switchers will do 4K footage. But for most people, that's not that important, and the features that you get out of this are so powerful. also you're able to do all of the compression and all the video streaming and everything off of the device instead of your computer. One of the reasons why a lot of people have problems streaming to Twitch or YouTube or anything like that is because their computer is trying to handle all the compression. And they're usually trying to do that at the same time as they're doing something else, like playing a video game or whatever. And so it can't really handle both tasks very well at the same time. And in this case, you don't have to worry about that because the switcher actually takes care of it. And hopefully, one of these days, if and when we're actually able to have gatherings again and be able to do stuff as a group, Rich and I have talked about having talks and whatnot at the gallery, being able to open it up as something that we can do. Talks on various subjects in the maker community. And it would be nice to be able to live stream those events. And so this is something that I can use for that, where we'd actually be able to live stream that and make it available at the same time as we're actually doing the event, so people who can't attend in person can actually see what's going on.
And what lens were you using with the Blackmagic?
That one was a 12 to 35 millimeter lens. It's the Blackmagic is using a micro four thirds sensor. This is going to be super geeky for most people, but for those who are interested, it is a micro four thirds sensor, and it is using a Panasonic 12 to 35 millimeter lens, probably zoomed into about 24 millimeters, if I remember correctly. And then my lighting was coming from an Aperture 120D. Which is a LED constant source LED light that's daylight balanced.
Just pulling out all the stops.
Oh yeah. Well, the thing is, I've already got the gear, right? Like we use this stuff for when we're filming in the studio already. Having a decent camera is something that I've always had a pretty good camera at my fingertips. Initially for stills photography, and more recently for doing video work. And we're used to doing that sort of thing right now in the studio because we're filming a lot of what's going on. Like last week, we were working on building a new welding table for the studio, and so a lot of that was being filmed. Again, same thing with my shop stuff, my shop tours that I'm doing. Those are all being filmed on the Blackmagic cameras. So it's nice to have access to decent equipment that you can use for this. And, in this case, while it was overkill for a Zoom call, it is nice to be able to have access to it.
And for piping the video into Zoom itself, were there any hurdles to overcome there, or were you able to just pick it from the pop-up menu there?
One of the nice things about the ATEM Mini Pro is there's a USB-C port on the back of it. You plug that into your MacBook, and it's immediately recognized as an external webcam, and Zoom immediately prioritizes external webcams over the internal one. So I didn't even have to choose it. It just automatically picked it up and used it. It was unbelievably trivial to set up.
Nice. Yeah, I had no idea you were going to be doing this, and I too also set up an external camera, but I did it just for kicks, really, because I'm not a huge fan of Zoom. I don't trust Zoom further than I can throw it, especially given some of the nefarious stuff they were doing to people's systems, and a lot of the comments too, just from the CEO there. So I actually, because I was going to be hopping on the Zoom call, went to the trouble of spinning up an entirely new OS on my machine because I didn't want to install Zoom on my main machine. So I whipped up a quick partition, set up a whole new OS, and since I was doing that, I was like, heck, why not just do all sorts of crazy things I wouldn't normally do on my system? So I installed a couple of third-party pieces of software, and actually pulled the signing certificate off of Zoom as well because it wasn't quite so easy for me to pipe my camera in, but using a combination of two apps, Camera Live and Cam Twist, I was able to spin up a little siphon server and pull in the feed from an old DSLR that I was able to pipe my video through.
Nice.
So I don't recommend doing this on your own systems. This is just purely just an exploration to see what was possible, because this isn't something that's officially supported. I have an older Canon DSLR, and Canon has actually released a lovely utility for their newer cameras, I believe since the pandemic started, to make it very simple to use your DSLR as a webcam. But I went a more surreptitious route, and surprise, surprise, it actually worked.
Yeah, there's a few options out there that make things a little bit easier. It's nice to see the Canon's made it a bit simpler for their newer cameras to work. I shoot Nikon, and I don't think Nikon's done anything similar, but I've never looked into it because I've got this A10 Mini Pro, so I don't really need to. I know a friend was asking me about the Elgato option that's out there. I haven't actually tried it, but I know that a number of people have started using that. I think it was originally designed for gamers to be able to live stream, and they've, so it handles I think any HDMI connection into it, but a single HDMI connection into it, but it's still relying on the base computer to do a lot of the compression and sorting out that video for you. So that's why it's they're not quite as good as some of the hardware solutions like the A10 Mini is. But yeah, it's there's certainly a lot of people trying to figure out how to get better video going out of their computers these days, and it's who would have thought in 2020 that the fact that most laptop manufacturers are still putting really crummy video cameras in their laptops was actually going to be a sort of a global problem, and it was going to be a concern for people.
Yeah, you probably get better video from your iPad than you do from your laptop.
Absolutely, yeah. The fact, I think the front-facing camera on the iPads, at least the iPad Pro, has been better than anything that's in a MacBook Pro, at least for the last 3 or 4 years. I would not be surprised if the next generation of MacBooks, for instance, all have dramatically better cameras in them. And same thing with, all the Windows laptops that are out there and the Chromebooks and stuff like that. I bet you we're going to see a huge surge in higher quality video cameras in these things.
Well, if the rumors are to be believed, the next Mac is likely to be far more iPad-like in terms of its processor than any of the Macs that have come before it.
Yeah, it's sort of an interesting, again, getting into sort of geeky, down in the weeds stuff. It looks like Apple's going to be doing a transition from the Intel processors they've been using for a while into their own ARM-based processors that they design and make themselves. Yeah, well, that'll be an interesting thing to see and follow. Again, it's going to be pretty geeky for most people, but it has the potential to dramatically improve performance and, more importantly, dramatically improve battery life. So I'm really curious to see that. That's going to have a huge impact, I think, on portables and just how much battery life we're getting out of them. Because I don't think they're going to do much to reduce the size of them in terms of battery capacity. There's good reasons why they're at the battery capacity they are now, and it's because it's the maximum they can, at least in a 16-inch MacBook Pro, for instance. That's the maximum that they can put into a MacBook and still have it legal to fly on planes in the US. And I suspect that they'll probably keep that max battery life the way that it is, just because it is convenient. But at the same time, if they can get dramatically better battery life, like if they can get the same battery life that an iPad gets, sort of equivalent, my MacBook could probably go for days without charging at that rate. So I'll be really interested to see that.
It's one thing that came up on Time for a Pint that I wasn't adequately prepared for. Is Matt asked me about the story behind tracking down the crystal, and I have probably ordered hundreds, if not close to 1,000 crystals between the time that I had finally tracked down this particular obscure crystal, which was a very unique crystal for a watch that had belonged to my grandfather. So the details were fuzzy, but in reflecting on it since Matt asked there in the live stream, more of the details have come back into focus for me. And I thought it'd be interesting for us to dive a little deeper into just what it takes, or can sometimes go into hunting down obscure parts. And there's going to be different approaches or avenues of attack for different parts in a watch. But for purposes of this conversation, we'll just stick to the crystal, and I'll relay in a little more detail what I went through to finally get this crystal. And ideally, with a watch, you'll have a model number to work off of. And in this particular case, I didn't have that, which makes things even more challenging. Because if you have a model number, often you can just get a part number from a reference book that way. But unfortunately, this particular Longines watch, which is from the early 1950s, does not have a model number on it. I've not been able to pin down any advertising material or sales catalogs or the like from the era either. And unfortunately, Longines itself sold off a lot of its tooling and whatnot from this era back in the quartz crisis. So Longines itself is not able to help with parts for watches of this age and from this era in the same way that a company like, say, its brother company, Omega, or brands like Rolex and Patek Philippe would be able to do for their clients. So I was kind of left to my own devices with this. And I was actually oblivious to the fact that this particular watch ever had a special crystal on it, because the way that I received it, it was just a very plain looking crystal. And then I came across in a book that essentially a catalog for collectors, what looked to be the identical watch that my grandfather had owned, and it had this really unique crystal on it that I hadn't seen on any sort of watch before. And it very nicely mimicked and complemented the contours of the case. So to me, it's said, like, this is how the watch was supposed to be. So that's sort of what sparked my search for this crystal. And that's basically all I had to go on. And so I called around to a number of firms across Canada and the US. And I'm pretty sure I actually called cousins over in the UK as well, and just sort of described it, which is really never a good way to try and pin down a watch part. And watch supply houses have to deal with this sort of thing all the time from people who aren't watchmakers. So as a watchmaker, calling that this isn't the way to really be going about this. A few companies were open to having me email them a copy of the photo, so I did that. And unfortunately, the photo itself, I can't even really call it that. This was a black and white image. It might even have been a woodcut at the time that it was produced. So this is not the most pristine details that you're getting out of something like this, but that's sort of the quality of printing that was available back in the 1950s for mass printed items. And this book for collectors was essentially amassed from a whole bunch of these sorts of images. So that didn't get me very farther. A couple of false leads in the States and in Montreal. And ultimately what I ended up doing is every once in a while I'll need to get a crystal custom cut for an older case, generally for really old pieces, say from the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, particularly Art Deco type stuff. And this watch from my grandfather kind of has an Art Deco vibe to it, although it's not strictly speaking from the Art Deco period. So when I was sending another piece off, I was like, you know what, this is a watch that means a lot to me. I'm kind of nervous sending it off, but I do this all the time with them. I've never had an issue doing this before. So I sent it off to them with the description of the crystal as well. And they hunted around and they were able to find in the stash of parts that they had somewhere, they were able to find the crystal and get it to me. Whereas my initial inquiry with them had dug up nothing. Now, I know they buy out different watchmakers and things like that to bolster their supply of parts. So it may have been that they truly didn't have it at the time that it just inquired, just sort of with a description and a picture. But it may have been too that it's really hard to try and pin down a piece or a crystal, particularly when you're talking about the tolerances on these things. Like if you're off by 1/10 of a millimeter on a crystal, that it's just not going to fit. And you either end up having to modify it or it's going to fall out, or all sorts of not so good things could transpire. So it's important to have a really good fit.
And it's not as if you're talking about a simple round crystal here, right? You're talking about one that has a fairly unique shape to it. I can honestly say I've never seen anything that even comes close to the shape of this crystal.
No, nor have I. So the closest is a little bit of unusual faceting that I've seen that's almost jewel-like or around some acrylate crystals. But in terms of the faceting on this, I haven't seen anything else like it ever. So I'm glad that I was able to ultimately track it down. But I did actually have to send the case in to a company, and they spent the time to hunt something down for me. And I'm very grateful to them for that. So I'm quite stoked to have a new old stock crystal on this piece. And that is the fuller, more detailed story on that. This happens with all sorts of parts all the time. I think one of my favorite memories, or at least another favorite memory in dealing with Perrin, who's let's see, one of the part suppliers I order from most, being here in Canada, is I had this old pocket watch that had a really unique balance staff in it, and of course one of the balance pivots was broken. So I took it out of the balance and measured it all up, and I sent a drawing off to Perrin, and they wrote me back. I could see in the preview it said "congratulations" with a big exclamation mark, and I was kind of excited. And it went on to say when I opened the email, it says, "Congratulations, this is the most detailed drawing of a balance staff we have ever received. Unfortunately, we have nothing close." And so I had to fire up the lathe on that one and turn a brand new balance staff for that. But generally speaking, if you're patient and persistent, you can usually pin down the, hopefully best case scenario, the exact piece in new old stock condition, or at least something close. So often with balance staffs, and this is why I asked if they had anything that was even remotely close, is you can get something that's pretty close. You may have to shave off a few hundredths of a millimeter, or maybe a tenth of a millimeter here or there. But unfortunately, with this particular balance staff, as they said, they didn't even have anything close to it. So I had to turn that from the raw stock.
It is a bit challenging when you're dealing with parts and watches that you just can't get parts for, or they're challenging to find parts for. And this is one of the challenges I've had when it's come to sort of picking out what movements I want to use in the watches that I'm making. A lot of people have asked me why I don't want to just use ETA movements, and while some of them are certainly freely available today, and the parts are freely available for them, that's not necessarily always going to be the case. And in fact, it's changed dramatically in the last 10 years in terms of parts availability. So it's something that I need to consider when I'm figuring out what I want to make and what I want to use. And in some cases, it's just things that are so far out of date that there never would have been replaceable parts. Like I've got an 1850s pocket watch that I need to fix up, and one of I think there's like 3 or 4 gear teeth that are broken and missing from one of the wheels, and I'm going to have to fabricate a new wheel for it because there's just no way that anybody would have ever made interchangeable parts for this watch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sort of predates the era of interchangeable parts in watches.
Yeah, especially it was made in Scotland in the 1850s, and there's no way that anybody would like, even if I found another watch from the same watchmaker, the chances of that wheel matching close enough to be able to fit in this, it's just, there's no chance of that happening.
And tracking down parts for old watches is one thing, but it seems you are not alone in having some difficulty tracking down parts for brand new watches as well.
It's been amazing how difficult it's been with, I'm going to blame the pandemic. I'm assuming that's what's going on here. It seems like Switzerland is basically shut down, and at least parts of Switzerland aren't even answering their email. I've been trying to get a hold of Eterna now for the last few months, and I've heard nothing back from them. Sent a few different emails, and it looks like anybody that I had dealt with in the past from Eterna has left the company now, and their emails aren't even being forwarded off to somebody else. They're just bouncing straight back. So that's not encouraging, but we'll see if they eventually do respond back to me. So I've tried to order some other parts or some other movements as potential replacements. They won't be direct replacements, and the Eterna movement I was going to use was going to have a moon phase on it, and that's not necessarily an easy complication to find without a whole bunch of other stuff like the date window and things like that I just don't want. And so I'm trying to find a time-only movement that I'm happy with. But even then, ordering that has been a nightmare. There was one that I was trying to get out of the States, and that got canceled. I had to cancel that order because it was they couldn't figure out how to ship the thing internationally, which boggles my mind. And then I ordered a couple of ETA 7001s from Perrin out of Toronto, and they were great. They had it shipped out the same day, which was wonderful. But Canada Post has been twiddling their thumbs, and they picked up the package a week ago, last Thursday, and it still hasn't arrived 10 days later. So it's a little bit frustrating how difficult it's been actually getting things to me so that I can try and get these watches finished and out there.
Mm-hmm. This has actually become enough of an issue in the industry that the New York Times has actually reported on it this past week with an article about the fact that the coronavirus has just unleashed supply chain woes within the watch industry. And a lot of the article is focused on Swiss companies sourcing their parts from China, as many, let's say, medium-range watches do. But there are also issues within Switzerland as well, and some of that is brought up and brought to light in the article too. And certainly your own experience in trying to source some parts directly from Switzerland speaks to that as well. So this is an article we'll link to in the show notes as well.
Yeah, it's a serious problem, and I guess we'll see what happens with the restart of the economy, the restart of these countries. I don't know where Switzerland is at with trying to get back to work and trying to get things fired back up again, or their industry fired back up again. I know a friend of mine actually got stuck in Switzerland at the beginning of the pandemic. He sadly had to go over for a funeral for his grandfather, and he got over there, and then they wouldn't let him leave the country, and he got stuck there for a couple months. So I don't know how far they are along in actually, getting things back up and running it back to normal. But even once they do, I'm sure it's going to be months before they're doing anything even approaching normal sort of business. So that's one of the reasons why I decided to sort of put the moon phase movement, or the moon phase watch that I was working on hold. Did a slight redesign for a time only movement, which allowed me to make the watch a little bit thinner and allowed me to change up a few other things. I'll put out this first watch as a time only watch, and it'll be fine. I'm happy with doing a time only watch. It was something I had planned on doing at some point anyways. This just sort of moves it forward a little bit. We'll see how fast things change. Again, I still don't have a good strap supplier, and I don't have packaging yet. So both of those are things that I have to deal with at some point. And I still don't know what's going to happen with that. I'm just hoping that everything sort of picks up soon enough that I can actually get those things sorted out.
Mm-hmm. It's uncertain times, indeed.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like there are a number of factories in China actually having to close right down. And while it's not 100% clear in the article, there seems to be hints that the same is true for several smaller firms in Switzerland as well. And that they just simply don't have the sort of the cash on hand to carry on business after being shut down for so many months, or having large orders canceled by brands like Fossil and whatnot that these smaller firms were relying on as their bread and butter.
And in additional follow-up from that Time for a Pint episode, one of the questions that came up during the episode was asking which movement was in the watch that I was showing off. I had a Fears chronograph that I was showing off. It's a 1940s, sort of mid-40s chronograph. And it was a Swiss-made watch. The case and the movement were made in Switzerland, but it was made for the domestic UK market. It wasn't being exported, even though Fears was one of the largest exporters of watches in the UK at the time. This particular one was destined for the local UK market. And there were some questions as to which movement it was, and I didn't actually know at the time. I hadn't dug into it enough, but I've since been able to figure out that it was a Landeron 48 that's in that watch, and it's one of the workhorse chronograph movements that was available at the time. It's it's nothing remarkable, but at the same time, it's a good solid movement, and it's still running just fine today, 70 plus years later. So I'm pretty happy with it.
Yeah, Landeron made reliable chronographs, as did many Swiss brands, or rather movement makers of that era, like Venus and mm-hmm. of course Lemania and the like.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those common movements that a lot of people were using at the time, and and you can find on a lot of watches. So even if I needed to, I could probably find parts for it without too much difficulty. And obviously not new parts. They wouldn't, nobody's making new parts for this watch anymore, but I'm pretty sure that if I needed to, I could find a donor movement that was in rough shape that had the parts that I needed. And then the other bit of follow-up from the Time for Pint was that Time for Pint got a mention in the New York Times. Again, the New York Times makes a second appearance in this episode. And there was a really good article 6 days ago, I guess, called Just Hold Your Watch Next to the Screen. It's talking about how the sort of watch collector community has really embraced the idea of doing these virtual gatherings, and as a way of sort of compensating for the fact that we can't do what we normally do, which is meet in restaurants and bars. And so they talked about the Red Bar get-togethers that have been happening, as well as some of the live streams that have been going on. I know that Lee, you and Reputee, 1 Hour Watch, who we've obviously talked about a bunch of times on the show, he did a live stream, I think, with Red Bar one day, showing him doing some sketching for an hour, and then they also talked about Time for a Pint as well. So it's nice to see these groups who are really trying to keep going and to keep people sane in some cases during this lockdown. It's nice to see them getting some recognition like this and getting a boost like this in the New York Times.
Yeah, it's certainly well deserved. I really admire what everyone is doing to gather around and rally and sort of bring people together across the miles, despite not being able to get together in person. It's actually kind of neat to see the way that it's all taken shape, and the fact that there's some upside to this in the way that you're able to connect people on completely different continents that might not otherwise be able to all get around a table together in a pub somewhere. And I like that this has been sparked by this trying time of being in lockdown. And I'm encouraged too to hear that Chris Mann and the like are thinking of pressing forward and continue on these sorts of virtual get-togethers on into the future, even once this time has passed.
Yeah, the irony of it is that I'm actually chatting with Chris and Matt more because of this pandemic than I did beforehand, because we would chat obviously online and comment on each other's posts and stuff like that, but here I'm actually able to see these guys on a weekly basis, hear what they have to say. I can participate in the chat in the Zoom chat, which is nice. And we can all sort of joke around a little bit about what's going on, and it's nice to be able to do that. And so I'm actually able to interact with these guys in a way that I hadn't been, just because I am on another continent. And in fact, this weekend, the upcoming Time for a Pint is going to be offset quite a bit, because there's a couple of Australians that are going to be joining the live stream, and so they're moving it forward by 6 hours, which means that it's going to be like 7 a.m. our time on Sunday when the episode is being recorded live, in order to accommodate the Aussies. But that's the nice thing, is that we're able to do that. We're actually able to have a couple of people from Australia involved in this live stream, with 60, 80 people or whatever from Europe and North America. And that's just not something that you'd be able to do if you had to fly there. So it is nice to see that. And it's something I actually noticed when we started recording this podcast, is, even though you and I would get together on a semi-regular basis and chat and have lunch and whatnot, we actually talk a lot more because we record this podcast every couple of weeks than we ever did beforehand. So it is nice that using these virtual technologies to be able to connect and sort of forcing you to chat regularly. Obviously, it's going to be challenging to try and keep this up on a weekly basis. I don't think anybody could fault Chris and Matt for reducing the frequency of these virtual Time for a Pints. But even if it's once a month, once every 6 weeks, that would still be really great if that continues on after this lockdown ends.
Yeah, I don't know how they've managed to sustain this clip, because I'm struggling just to keep up with watching the videos on demand. and they're tuning in live, as are you. But
yeah, John, they did have to bring us in to show up on the show. So
just scraping the bottom of the barrel. Yeah.
They are running out of interesting people to talk to when they bring on a couple of Canadians from some obscure podcast to talk about watches.
Yeah, all that is to say, kudos to Matt and Chris for essentially birthing this out of thin air, just about. They really just decided to have a go at it, and they've refined things as the get-togethers have gone along. I mean, they very quickly realized that holding your watch up to a webcam as
it doesn't work.
New York Times article mentioned, it doesn't quite work. So Chris has prepared those slideshows, which show off the watches much better, and it's just I'm really happy with the format that they've come up with, and the fact that they're able to shed lights into corners of the industry and to watches and obscure pieces that a lot of us might not otherwise have been able to see.
One of the nice things about the setup that I was talking about earlier, the video setup that I have earlier, is that I could have actually set up to be able to show my watch live and be able to have a good overhead view of it and things like that, and be able to do a nice tight shot on it. But not everybody's in a position where they can do that. And Chris's alternative of having a PowerPoint that he does with photos, pre-prepared photos, is a great way of getting around this problem. It's worked out really well. And as you say, there have been some amazing watches that have shown up on here.
Mm-hmm.
They've had some spectacular guests, and us aside, they've had some really interesting people on the show, and they've had some watches that showed up that you would never see. Like when Kari was on, there's a couple watches that he brought along, and the chances of you ever seeing those watches are pretty low. So it's kind of nice to see that sort of thing happen and be able to hear from people that you just don't normally hear from. And it's really remarkable what they've managed to get going and what they've managed to do with this. Although I often find that an hour is just not quite enough. I know when we were on, the hour seemed to blow by pretty quickly, and I'm pretty sure that we could have. Well, we're used to talking for hours when we get on these calls, you and I, for the podcast. So I'm sure we could have gone on for another half hour, 45 minutes without too much effort on that live stream. So yeah, sometimes the hour seems to go by a little bit too quickly.
I was very mindful of trying to keep things as tight and flowing, not to chew up too much time to keep us under the hour mark. Although I do 100% agree with you in terms of the Voti line episode that you mentioned. That's one of the few that I have been able to tune in live to. And I had all manner of questions I would have loved to have asked. But unfortunately, the meeting did have to end, and there was not time to dive into this sort of level of detail I would have liked to have gotten into with some of the pieces. But I am supremely grateful that they were even able to get Voutilainen and other great watchmakers like Roger W. Smith on to chat. And it's just been, just a really great initiative to see blossom. And I don't think it is tenable to continue doing them every week, as you have mentioned. I do hope it is something that is able to continue on in some manner well into the foreseeable future.
Well, at some point or another, Chris and Matt are going to start running out of their own watches to show off every week, and I don't know that their budgets are going to be able to maintain buying new watches every week just to show them off on Time for a Pint. So, at some point or another, something has to give.
Thanks for listening to Off Hours. You can find detailed show notes at offhours.show. If you'd like to keep up to date with the show, follow us on Twitter @offhours. John can be found on Twitter @UnderTheLoop, and Chris can be found on Twitter and Instagram @silver_hand.